Too late. Well, okay, that's okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Wait.
Wait. Hello.
Oh,
So nice to see everyone.
It's really wonderful. This is perfect timing. I'm going to just say hello to everyone. Maybe put mute on. I think we got a little bit of feedback from Uncle Neil. But welcome everyone this evening. Everyone from all the four directions, and I'm just feeling so relaxed and grounded. I was at the land in Milton, our new center.
So beautiful.
If we have time, maybe at the end we can maybe show one or two pictures if I get my my technical act together.
But there's something about just working in the ground, right? Getting your hands dirty and being in there. It was so beautiful. And I totally hear you, Jody, about being grounded. And it was a beautiful afternoon. And we're so excited to have Grandmother Renee and Uncle Neil here. And we can hardly wait to have them out as well. And Renee's been out there before, but Neil, we can hardly wait to have you out on the land just so you can see the greatness of everything that is happening out there.
It's not a golf course, Uncle Neil, but you can hit a golf ball. You're 400 yards or two. Anyway, welcome everyone. I think I'm just going to step out of the room and sit back and watch this beautiful visit that I think everyone has been waiting for. So welcome everyone.
Yes, welcome. And welcome Grandmother Renee and Neil again.
Okay, I'll delete too. I'll shut everything down here.
Yeah.
Let Grandmother Renee do all the talking tonight.
Yeah.
I need somebody to bounce my words off.
And you guys do such a wonderful job just having a conversation and tea, and remember when. And you have so many stories to share and so many experiences. It's just lovely to hear you. And, I too, just like Jody, I'm going to step back as well, but we just want to welcome you. We're so thrilled that you're here. And for another edition of Tea with Totah. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, today it's been a long time since we were sitting together, and a lot has happened. And one of the most important thing is it's gardening time. So we were just thinking about all the stories that goes with gardening and with the new adventure of planting your seed. How many have started? How many have gone into that mode of creating I would call it Grandma's place, because that's where Grandma always had a garden. And it was fun. It was fun because she told us all about life. And that was the most important thing. I remember how she would get all the seeds ready. She had a story for everything. And that's where you learn those stories about why the food came to us. It goes back to creation story, talks about the food, how they follow their original instruction, talks about the time when we would do ceremonies to welcome them. And so this is an adventure. How many received the rain today? It was very important that we had received this rain. And gardening is the most healthy way of building your spirit, because it has a real big purpose in life. And gardening was a way of life for all of us, because we were, as you say, we were independent. We didn't depend on grocery stores. We did our own thing. We had all these things for us that just came right out of the garden. Today, our children don't know where these things come from. You ask a child, where does pickles come from? Oh, the pickle factory. They don't know that it comes from the garden. And today, a lot of us are not thinking about those farmers that are really working hard. And so I like at this time is all of us to think about those farmers that have putting in the crops, those crops that is needed to keep us in that good place. And so I'd like to talk about gardening today, about planting our seeds and remember when. Remember when we would turn over the soil. It was a big thing. I remember when I was little, my dad would borrow our neighbor's horse. This horse seemed to be everybody's workhorse because once one farmer was done, he would go to the next farm, and they would because back then everybody helped and supported one another. And this horse was so big, maybe because I was so little. I swear my legs were straight out when my dad would put me on top of the horse, and I hung on to that big collar that it had, and I felt so good. Here was my dad going behind us, and he taught me how to drive that plow, and it felt so good. When that plow was going through that our mother the earth, it had a fragrance. It had a smell that, wow, that's what I've been looking for all the time. And when I do that today, I'm remembering when I was a little girl and when I was in that place of bare feet, as you say, their little straw hat, because Grandma would always have a hat for us to go outside at that time. And we'd be out there from early morning, and then we'd come in before noon. Grandma would start her meal, and then we would sit there and have tea, and then later on she says, well, we'll wait a while. And I said, oh, okay. And then we would go back out in the afternoon, and we come back in the evening towards supper time, and then she would come in, and we get supper ready again, and then we would go back out. It was always an adventure. I know a lot of people today would say, oh, that's boring. But no, it wasn't boring. I said my grandma was really smart, because when I went down to visit her, she would tell me, go to the granary, get holes in the rakes and stuff. And so I would go out there, have the wheelbarrow. Oh, I thought I was top dog, because having that opportunity to help my grandma. And I bring the wheelbarrow there, and then she said, oh, just place it at the end. So when I was young, I would be out there. I didn't need a hoe. I was right down there and pulling out the weeds and everything. And my grandma would talk about that. She'd talk about how my life, and in my life there would be times when I would have to take care of the weeding in my own life. She said there's going to be times when you need to protect your environment, protect your home. And I often thought about that. What do you mean, Grandma? She says, oh, there's going to be these people that will, as they say, cause much sadness to you. And I wondered about that. And so she taught me a lot about life later on. She also taught me how the most important thing about the seed is she talked about sex. Can you imagine your grandma talking to you about sex? Well, my grandma did it in a good way. And she talked about before we would get the garden ready, the land ready, before my dad would plow the land, because my grandpa had passed away. And so my grandma, she continued to work the land all by herself. But my dad, he'd be working, but on the weekends we would always be down there. But I would stay there during the summer, being with her and help her. And so we were getting the seeds ready. And she said, she poured out the seeds because we were going to be planting corn. And she said, I want you to look at those seeds. And I noticed what she was doing. She was separating three bunches. And she was going like this. And she said, what do you think I'm doing? And I was watching her, and I said, are you looking for the healthy, the good seeds? She says, yeah. She says, that's how it is in your life. You're going to think about someday you're going to have children. And she said, you have to think about this. You have to think about choosing someone that will have a good seed. And I never thought of that till later on in life when I got older. Even as a grandma, I still share that story with my children, my grandchildren. And she talked about how there are some. She would sort those seeds in different piles. And she said, we always learn how to share. So this one was for the garden. And this one was for the animals. And this one was for the compost. So you see, there was always that idea of sharing whatever you had in life. And so there was many stories that I learned, many things that I learned by just being in the garden. I learned a lot about life and how we need to nurture. My grandma would, grandmas never wore slacks then. Grandmas never wore slacks. I remember my grandma having her dress, her apron, and then she'd tie her scarf around her head and she'd be out there. It was a beautiful memory that I still have in my mind. And she'd be singing, she'd be humming. And I asked her, I said, who's listening, Grandma? And she says, because she said, you have to listen. And I went, so who's listening, Grandma? She says, they are listening. They are listening. Everything is listening. Even the birds are listening to you right now because they're going to be singing because you have planted some seeds. And so she says, they're going to be on the watch for it too. But know that the seeds need that because you see, that's the most important lesson I learned that day. She said, the seed that we're going to be planting has instructions just like you. But their instruction is they're a special gift. I want to let you know they're a special gift because you see, they are to keep us well. They're to keep us from going, we don't have a hospital. We don't have these things like everybody else does, or it's far away. So we have to learn how to be well all the time. And so I often thought about that. And I was so blessed that when the crops came, I ate everything fresh from the garden. Grandma had horseradish. She had all different kinds of vegetables. She even had peanuts too. And that was really a treasure. I'm still amazed at my grandma. She would have her garden way in the front of her property. She lived far off the road, but her well was way over here. But my grandma would carry those water and she'd water those plants. And she'd be talking to them and she would encourage them, as you say. And I could just smell the rain when it came and it hit dark on the land. My grandma would say, come on, let's go outside. She said, the rain is singing for the plants. And I said, the rain is singing? She says, yeah. And so the plants they will take their turn and it will sing. And I thought, oh, so everybody sings? She says, yes, that's what the Creator planned it for all of us. So I'm very grateful for my grandma at that time of the seeds and gardening. She had good soil. Both my grandparents lived along the river. And so they really had good soil. But I couldn't imagine how my grandma would carry that water a good distance away to water all those plants. She had tomatoes, she had raspberries, she had strawberries, she had rhubarb, she had potatoes, she had corn, she had everything. It seemed, and that's what she said. This is my as she said, this is my grocery store. This is where I get the things that I need for us for the winter. And so I'm just going to turn it over to Uncle and let him share what his memory of remember when of planting the seeds.
What? Planting. I'm not too, what do you call, regarding the planting. Only when we were younger, I remember them always going up the hill because there are big fields up there and getting into that land ready. And I remember one story that one of my uncles told me about when he was a kid, how they used to do the gardening, and it wasn't nothing with the hoe or nothing. It was all done by hand. There
Mm-hmm.
was no tools really to use. So what they would use are those broken up, the sticks that break off the branches and go into what they call dry rot. And what they would do is that's how they would furrow the land. He said they draw just a line in the ground all the way
Mm-hmm.
across in a straight line, and then whoever was doing that, then they would come behind with these seeds and drop it, and then somebody behind them would close that up. And I remember that for some reason. And this was when he was young. That was probably good for 40, maybe 50 years before I was born, I think, because when they used to talk about planting, it was everybody got together. Everybody got together to get ready for the planting season. I remember telling you this story when I was a kid. We used to get on a wagon would come by with horses and pick up my grandparents and myself, my sister, and then we'd head up and help. They'd all be helping while we played around. And a lot of the things that I remember about the growing, and these fields weren't small. They were huge fields. Each field had something. And the one that my grandma and them used to have look at help with was the one that grew potatoes, I think. I think potatoes and geez, I can't remember now. So long ago. But so everyone when everything was done, they go to the next one if somebody had fallen behind. And that was the beauty of our culture back then, when people would help each other. But I don't know when the gardening stopped. People started growing their own stuff in their own yards, and a lot of them, like my aunties, and used to do that in their backyards. And I'd go watch what they were putting there, and they would always tell us not to play in the garden, and they'd always tell us that because what they were doing is going to provide food for just the certain families now, because a lot of the growing part or a lot of community was beginning to separate. This new world thing came into play, and I figure by 19 I can't really remember when that started happening, where people are only doing their own gardens, but they would share a little bit of their garden. They would say, I got some yellow beans here, you want some? He'd go over and get some. Or I got some onions here, you want some onions? Oh, we'd go over, so that's how that started that's how things started to happen. Families growing their little wee gardens, but they'd call upon you, say, here, take this to your mom and dad.
Uh-huh.
And those squash, I think it's squash, I forget how, those things. Take this to your mom and dad. Okay, take off, go home, take them over, and I tell them, Mom, they gave me to go. They gave this to you. And they'd be really happy. And then one night, my dad and my mom decided to get the garden going too. And what we didn't have that machine to till it, right? We didn't have that many horses anymore, or we didn't have the things that we needed to. But what he did when he tilled that soil was use a spade. He turned that all the time. Then my mom would come along and rake it down, and they'd till it again. And they had a little garden. Oh, I remember my dad used to grow watermelon. Oh, oh, that was a treat in itself. But every time watermelon grew, he'd go pick it. He'd go pick it. And he always said that somebody will come along and might take them. That's when that time changed. when things started to change for us and get the gardening part. One night he picked up 3 watermelons. Oh, good sized watermelons, right? He gave one to his sister, my aunt, and he gave it to another sister, my other aunt. And they waited for the other ones to grow so he'd give it away. So because we couldn't eat all, well, that's not what it was all about, eating watermelon. Baked watermelon. Anybody try that? But when I watched him doing that, and I seen him putting that together. And when they were done, I'd see my mom going over there with seeds and putting them down. They'd be there most of the day doing all that. And then back and forth, they take the water. With, those little buckets, right?
Yeah.
And then with the little nozzle on the end, and they'd walk back and forth over them, back and forth. And then, as we didn't have running water back then.
No.
We didn't have running water. We just had that old pump, that hand pump. We had that hand pump, and then they'd say you pump that water into these pails. Okay, so I'd be pumping. Holy man, it took me, they'd come in with a pail, they'd put another one, take another one out, I'd be pumping away. But that was my part. That was my part. And I'd go watch my mom while she looked after the garden, pulling all the weeds out. She'd have these onions, I think. Yeah, onions. And then she'd have cucumbers. Yellow beans, of course. Yellow beans, that was a must. Yellow beans were always the favorite. And green beans, kind of like the, what they call them, butter bean, is it? Butter beans? Butter beans and green beans is. Oh, the soup that come out of that, boy. She'd go pick a whole basket, a handful like that, put her pot out, put it on the water, that old wood stove, and heat it up. And then all of a sudden, she'd be adding things to it. And then she'd make that baked bread, what we call scone, or fried bread. And we'd have soup, butter bean soup with salt pork, potatoes, carrots, onion, of course. And I can't remember what the 50th one was. But, oh, man, that was so good. Right out of the garden. Right out of the garden. And she'd always give me the bag and say, go get some beans. I want to give some to Auntie Nora or Auntie Olive or Auntie Audrey. So I'd go be picking these beans. And I'd bring them out, and she'd spread them out in 3. Then she'd send me off to my Aunt Audrey's, or she sent me off to Aunt Nora's or Auntie Olive's, and she'd give these beans to them. And that's the kind of thing that they all started to do, was that they had their own gardens, but they would share with other people. I remember when the season was over, when all the vegetables and everything else had stopped growing, I'd go watch them again. My dad would do the same, would do this. He'd turn the soil again with that shovel. And then he'd start pulling the old plants out. And what he would do with them is not just throw them away. He'd go lay them someplace. And sometimes he would bury some of it. And that would be I can't remember what he had to bury there at that time. But anyway, so when we look at that, he had flattened it right out again. There was nothing there. The season was over. Because and then my cousin's dad would say, he'd say, it's time for the garden to sleep, is what he would say. That's what they would say. And I remember that by my uncle, one of my great uncles. He's the one who said that. He says, he'd say, the growing season is now over, he said. And then the garden that they planted, it's over. And we had a good meal out of whatever it was good. And then somebody would grow potatoes. He'd bring those, not much potatoes. Remember how a long time ago, even when they only had a little bit of potatoes, it could feed 20 people because it was all shared. Okay? And you ate what you was put in front of you, no matter what it looked like. You ate what was put in front of you because it came from that garden. Mijin manda, they'd say. It came from the garden. You eat this, is what they would say to us as a kid. And I remember that. I remember my mom always used to say that. "Iushkana mijin manda." She said, "Oh my goodness, eat this. It's good for you." Okay, so I ate it. But the only thing is, I'm glad they didn't know how. I'm glad they didn't grow dumplings. I'm not a dumpling fan. A dumpling garden? No, I didn't. Only when I was a little guy, I remember they used to call me dumpling. No, I'm just kidding. And but the beauty of it though is that you remember that you remember those little seeds that they put in the ground. When you go look there, you see them, the little pieces coming out of the ground, the greenery coming out. And then all of a sudden they're maybe a half inch out of the ground. The next time you go, they're over 2 inches out of the ground. Next thing you know, the plant is probably, well, bigger than what you see, maybe about a foot, maybe a foot and a half high. All of a sudden you see these flowers coming out. And all of a sudden you see these little things popping up. And that was the beans, And then the onions you see all in a straight row, they're all growing. And that reminded me that sometimes there's, like I said, there's some stuff I didn't like to eat, but I was told to eat it because it's hard work putting a garden together. My grandmother Renee says it's hard work, and it is very hard because we didn't have running water back then on the island. We had a pump. I was one of the pumpers, and the garden got the pumpee. And but I'm really understanding now that a lot of these things come from the earth, our mother, and all those when those plants come, they save the seeds, like the strawberries. I heard somebody saying sometimes they collect strawberry seeds, and they put them down. I don't know how it's done because I've never seen it done. Watermelon seeds. I remember my dad did, and I remember this watermelon thing. I remember when they got a watermelon from town, and then he says, "Take it on, Manda." He said, "I'm going to grow these watermelons." And what he would do is save the seeds from the watermelon, and dry them. He'd dry them, put them on I don't know what kind of paper that was, and then they dry. And then when it was ready to plant them, he'd go put them out there. And when I seen those plants starting to come out and spread out like this over the ground, it's kind of like a wreath on the ground, right? It's kind of like a hat. It looks like that. And then all of a sudden you see these little things popping up. All of a sudden they go like this. Then all of a sudden they just grow. And voila, we had watermelon. And I remember one of my aunts grew what is that stuff called? It's green. It's like lettuce.
Oh yeah.
She grew lettuce in her garden. She grew lettuce in her garden, and she'd come down with a couple of those lettuce, big a head of lettuce, 2 of them for my mom and dad. Oh, those were good. It's hard to wash the leaves off and start eating it, right? Leave that alone, my mom would say. We'll have it for dinner. But I know I'd go sneak in the fridge and take another leaf out and start eating it. Because it was so fresh. It was right from the garden. It was right from the garden. When I think about life itself, I think of us as a garden. We're the plants. Us human beings are the plants. When we started off as seedlings. And as we came into this world, we began to understand, when I see this, I begin to see a little baby grow from, like this. And then all of a sudden, the little one grows, eh? And all of a sudden, they're in full bloom. It's kind of like watching the plants grow. Like I said earlier, where I go out and see this little green thing popping out of the ground, all in a row. And then all of a sudden you see them growing. It's like that with us as human beings, being the plants. The only difference with us is that when we grow up, we got to return that favor to the earth and start growing things ourselves. When I see the seedlings of a tree, mind you, some of those trees, if you move them, you got to do it when the leaves are not on them. You got to do it while those little trees are sleeping, getting ready for bedtime for the winter. My dad said that. He says, always if you want to transplant a tree from one place to another, there's things you got to do. He said that when we do that, he says, if you do it while the leaves are still on it, the tree may die. And he was right. He was right. Sometimes the tree would take, but sometimes it wouldn't. So you have to do it when that winter time comes where, everything all the leaves are gone. All the leaves are on the ground covering Mother Earth, that blanket of leaves. And then you go look, and you want to decorate your yard with a beautiful tree. So you wait for all that to happen. You don't rush over there and dig it out and put it there and leave it. There's processes. It's kind of like that gardening. There's a process to garden.
Mm-hmm.
You got to till the soil. You got to make sure everything's off of it. Then you get ready to get it ready to plant. Once you plant, you cover everything up. And then you see everything. Then you got to water it every day almost. In the morning and the evening, my mom and dad used to do that. Before I went out to play in the evenings, I'd always have to pump the water for them to go out and do that. Or they'd send me out to water the plants. And there was but so again, when we look at that tree, you're going to transplant a tree. You got to remember that you got to dig. How did they say? What did he say? He said probably like this around the bottom of that little tree that you're going to plant. The tree may be only about 3 feet high. He says the roots go out gradually. That's what I was told about those trees. When you transplant a tree, you do it in the fall, when they're getting ready to sleep. This way you don't shock them. They'll just say, oh, somebody's digging me out. Oh, I'll just continue on sleeping. That's what that little tree probably is saying, in their own language, of course. And then in the springtime, you go check that tree, and then you see these little buds. That's life. That's what life is all about. You have to listen to the old ones and understand the meaning of how to do these things, because there is a process in planting, whether it be vegetables, whether it be fruit, whether it be a tree, or even a baby. There's a process. And that comes from our Creator. That comes from that spirit realm. That comes from all over. If we know what we're doing, then we're going to be doing well. I remember a man came here. I can't remember his name. He was a potato farmer on the mainland side. He came over here, and he kind of showed us how to do these potatoes. Wow, that's really interesting. And I watched potatoes grow in a potato bag one time too.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's at this time of the year when these potatoes start to turn dark, and all of a sudden the eye of the potato, you can see these things popping up on a potato. That's the time. They're growing now. They need that earth. They need that earth. And that's when you put them down, is when those eyes come up and you cut them. All of a sudden you can have a potato feast.
Mm-hmm.
Potato escargot, potato sandwich, potato cereal, all that stuff. It's all about potato. And I remember that potato. I remember my mom grew some potatoes, and she did good with that. My mom and dad, they grew potatoes. They weren't big. They were probably maybe about that size. Small. But you know what? That was the best darn potato I ever ate. Was out of that garden that day. That fresh potato coming out of there. Maybe small, maybe bigger, but it's a lot of hard work. It takes a lot up here and a lot in the heart to put all those things together. Sometimes you make mistakes, but you know what? When you're planting, Mother Earth, as Grandmother Renee says, that those plants are talking to you. So they talk to each other. Okay, we'll grow up like this, and they do. So really, it wasn't a mistake. It's just a little bit of time that you have to spend with it, right? Mm-hmm. I remember a friend of mine, when I started this path quite a while ago, he says, when my mom and dad used to get the garden ready, they said we used to, because they lived on the land, and how they did things was different. And when they got the soil ready to plant, even before they did something with the soil, they sang.
Mm-hmm.
They sang. And then once they were done, they did the soil. And just before they started to put the plants in, they put all their what did he say? I forget what kind of blanket they use, a blanket of some sort. Anyway, they put it on the ground, and all the plants sat on the ground, open. And he'd say they would sing to the seeds and whatever else that they're going to put in there, and they'd put everything in. They'd celebrate after they started the plant. After the planting was over, they'd celebrate. And then they'd keep an eye on the garden, water it, talk to it. Like Grandmother Renee says, you have to talk to your plants in order for them to grow. Just kind of like our parents talk to us in order to grow. Same thing. If I was a plant, I don't know what I'd want to be. Maybe a sunflower so I can see far. Big hat. But again, like I said, it's planting is a very it's hard work, but it's also happy work.
It is,
because the end result is what you're eating. I agree with Grandmother Renee. We have to talk with those farmers. We have to offer prayers to them because they are providing for us. They are providing all the foods that we eat. I remember when my aunt who lived next door to us got these strawberry plants. Wow. She planted them on where my dad's barn used to be. those strawberries were big. They were huge, but they were juicy. She would, we'd go over and watch her, and she'd bring us about 3 or 4 of those, and we were kids, and she'd bring us 3 or 4 of those strawberries, and we'd eat them. Oh God, man, those were delicious. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time. I see Grandmother Renee there chomping at the bits there, wanting to eat something from the garden.
That's true. With us, the people of the Longhouse, we do have ceremonies all year round, and it's always with the season. I mean, with the months, it tells us what. We didn't have January, February, March. We had what was happening at that time. So April would be when the frogs were singing, or when the suckers were moving, the fish, and so or when the worms were moving. And so this was always almost like saying you got to get ready. And so each month was telling us a time when to get ready. And so May was when we would see the little buds on the trees, and then we knew we had to. And there was a certain time that we could plant because there was always that frost, and that's what we always had to wait. It was like 24th of May. We had to put in our gardens before we went down and got our cheese and our bread. And today this year we never got our cheese and our bread. I guess it's going to come later on in the fall. So we had ceremonies, and what we did was. When the trees started to wake up, we would know that we had to get ready, physically, because you're laying. I mean, not laying. You're not being as active in wintertime. You're more sluggish. So we would have a tonic, and that was from the seeds. I mean, that tree that grew was to replenish us with the energy that was needed to get us ready for the summer. We had to get back into movement, and that's very important part of ceremony. Our body movement is a part of ceremony. That's what the Creator created us for. Everything that we do was according to sharing, giving, doing. And so this is a part of ceremony. When we're moving, we're constantly moving. And today we hear a lot of people are having a lot of health problems because they're no longer, as they say, being as active. And the garden, that was the benefit. You know, a lot of our grandparents, gosh, they would be out there in the fields. They'd be in their 80s and they'd be working. And that's what really built them up, you know. And that's what how my grandma explained. She says, you know, when you work in the garden, you have more benefits than you realize. Your legs will become stronger. But also, you know, you had to squat a lot. That was building up muscles, you know, for birthing. And, you know, these things that came as very important for us as women. And this was to be squatting because we were to be picking up our children later on. We were to be picking them up. And so squatting was an exercise, a movement that was needed for us to continue our lives in a good way. It was to help our pelvic area. So there's more into it when we know about working with the land, being with the land. The land was grooming us to have a long life. But now we lost that relationship with the land. So we become, as they say, caught up in idle way of life. And people say the garden was hard, but once you knew your routine, you knew what to do. To me, I didn't think of it as hard. It was something that I had to do. And you know, when you're raised that way, you wake up, you know what you got to do. And so you do it without being told. You know what? It's part of your contribution of bringing home the food. And that made me feel so good as a young girl, knowing that I was helping my grandma provide for her future and our future. And also for all those that came to my grandma would always be sharing. She had apple trees, and people would come from miles around just to have some of her apples. She would be like, oh, go and help yourself. Oh, there was rhubarb. I had too much. Maybe you can use some. And so, you know, because she did that, there was a lot of food coming from the land because they heard her. And that, in the evening, I remember her singing. She always sang in the evening, and just like that red-winged blackbird, because my grandma lived along the river, both of my grandmothers. And the one grandma, she would be sitting out there, and when she would be sitting there, and the red-winged blackbird would start to sing. And so my grandma would start to sing, and it was so nice. You know, you used to hear that a long time ago. The next door, you would hear them sing their songs. You would hear them sing, you know, it would be gospel songs. It would be an old country and stuff. But it was a song that, you know, it was like almost so comforting that everybody was now resting because they'd done what they had to do for the day. It wasn't looked at as chores. It was looked at as keeping me physically fit. And to this very day, I don't mind. I don't mind carrying big bags because you know what? I had to laugh when Neil said he was just pumping away there. I said he must have big muscles on one side. You had to switch to the other arm to build up his muscles. And so that was keeping us firm. I know, because we used to have those pumps on our well, but also we used to have a certain nick to just flick those pails to make it completely go into the water and pull it up. Oh, if you could do it on the first you had that skill. Your grandpa or your uncles would show you, this is how you draw water. They would lower it down, then they would flick it, and then it would be full. And so it was one of the things that we learned. And also when it was when the bugs started to come, there was times the ladybug would, the firebugs would be out. My grandma would say, "Oh, we can't be picking medicine," and and then she would tell her the reason why. And so, listening to nature was always there telling us what we could, how to take care of things. Be ready for this time when you can't be doing this, or be prepared. And so, even when the bugs came, and those ladybugs, well, we had wood stoves back then, and we would go and clean the wood stove, all the ashes, and we would. That was my job, to take that pail of ashes, and I would take a little, like a little cup, and I would put it all over the potato plants. That was to protect her. We didn't use pesticides and all these things, because those ashes are medicine, and that's what we use to lye our corn. So this was very beneficial. That wood stove. Oh, my grandma had. I always thought she was a rich one, rich, because she had 2 houses, and she said, "Well, this is my cookhouse." Grandma would have 2 wood stoves in that little cookhouse, and then she would have one. She would have one in the house, and she said, "But in the summertime, we're going to only cook outside in the cookhouse." And she says, "Because it is to keep the house cooler." So these things are we improvised. We didn't have a lot of things, but to us it was just like we adapted, and we were provided for, and that's what we were very, as they say, proud people. We never had received handouts. As they said, I remember my grandma said, even my father saying that. He says, during the war, when all the big cities were they were a time of without. They didn't have a lot of food because they don't have gardens in the big cities, and so it was the people that lived out in the country that had those foods. But later on in life, they started to change their diet. And that's when they started to manufacture man-made cheese, all these products that has been harmful to us. And they would, you hear a lot of the elders talk about how now they had these rations that they would be giving out. Our people have always loved potatoes. How many of you have just loved those potatoes? Even talking about it, you're just going, I think I'll have a potato sandwich after I finish talking. But those potatoes was what made us, here we are today, our resilience. And that's what we did for the other people too that had famine. And that's so true, because our people send them potatoes. You heard of the Irish? Well, they call them Irish potatoes, but they didn't have potatoes. We sent it over to them, to provide for them, to take care of them. And they thanked us for doing that. So there's a lot of stories about our food, how we shared that. All these foods that you think came from all across the world, they came from here first. And the people took it and they planted it over there. Isn't that amazing? We have a lot of foods. This was heaven when the visitors came, because we had a good relationship with the land, and we spoke with the land and talked with the land. And so one of the things that in one of my research, because I love history of food, history of anything, wow, it came to be. And so I was looking about what was very important for me was the change of my diet, because I didn't want to have diabetes. And so, because the doctor says you're going to have diabetes because all the indigenous people have diabetes. And I said, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. So what I did was I took it upon myself to do more research on the foods that we used to eat. And I come across this article where in one of the books, one of the professors had written, scholars had written that they came upon a recording of people that they had them recorded as the Potato Clan. I bust out laughing when I read that one because I think every indigenous person was of the Potato Clan because that was our survival food. That's what kept us going. And so we've had potatoes for a long time, and those potatoes have there's something in that potato that makes us resilient. It's not the mashed potatoes today. It's we overcook the potatoes today. Long time ago, we used to eat that raw. How many have that desire to eat a raw potato? I do. I do. Because that is our medicine. You see, that other plant that we would have is what they give it a name that we call it was our wild potato because it grew abundance. And they call it, I have they have a foreign name for it. Well, they call it the Jerusalem plant. That can grow abundance. That grows it's so abundance and it just wants to grow for us because it's very beneficial for us. It is known for its support in helping those that have diabetes, but even through having it as for our meal for menopause. So these potatoes were very important to our way of life. And so when you see those seeds, I mean, their eyes peering, that is so true. When we would say, oh, my dad would say, now you get those potatoes ready. And my grandma, I remember her saying, well, you plant them. And she says, so that they can um, um, look up and see where they're going to go. And so I often think about that. I often have to chuckle and laugh when I plant my potatoes, because I always think of the humor that we had when, the plants love humor. And, my grandma would say, you don't complain when you go out there in the garden. You don't complain when you go and gather them because you see, they're just like us. And what they need to hear is good words and kind words. And those what the plants teach us is how to have a good mind. And so this is why we have ceremonies for them. We acknowledge all of them. And this is when the first visitors came, they thought we had many gods and idols. But all we were doing was we were just putting our hands up and saying, thank you. Thank you to the trees. Thank you to all the plant life. Thank you to even the grass and everything around us. We were saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, because they were making us resilient. We were eating weeds long before it was cool. So, we were cool people because we ate weeds, what they call dandelions. We skipped the cow because, where does the cow get all his nutrients is the grass. And so now people, what are they doing? They're making smoothies and all these things out of these things that we normally would have been just have in our diets. So you see, the Creator planted in those seeds instructions of resilience. And that's what I was told by my grandma. That is to make you well. And you notice a lot of people don't eat vegetables today. And you know what? They abuse their vegetables because they say, I don't like you. I don't want it. I don't want to eat it. And that's just like bullying. That's just like insulting someone right in their face. These are life givers. That's how my grandma explained. So I don't want to hear you insulting them because they came and they supported you. They don't have legs. They stood for you all through all kinds of changing of the weathers. It may be inhaling and may be so hot. They couldn't find shelter. They stood there and endured everything. And I always remember that. So that's why she says, you give thanks when they come because they're going to make you resilient. Because you have to remember, they stood out there all by themselves. They took on all these challenges but they knew how important you are. And that's why we need to tell our children these stories about the seeds. We need to tell our children the story about these foods. Why they came was to help us to survive. And so we don't have stories about pizza. We don't have story about chicken wings. You see, I feel very sad for the chickens. You know, they have endured a lot of pain just for us to have chicken wings. They are made plump and just like that. They have to be very fast growing. And some of these animals, they're institutionalized. They are like in residential school because all of them do not touch the ground. And that's also what is lacking. This is why that seed needs to touch the land. And that's why those chickens were very important with the land. They help with the gardening. And so you see, it's that cycle. One supports the other supports, and it continues to go and support each other so that we can benefit, so that we can be taken care of. And so when you go to the grocery store, honor them, thank them. I had noticed when some people, when they go to the grocery store, they'll touch the watermelon, for example. They'll knock on it, and you touch that texture of that. It's almost like when you pick up a stone or pick up something, you have that relationship, and you know what is good. You didn't go just pick something up because they had a relationship with you. So these seeds, we are so lucky that they're still following their instruction. They are here to help us to be well. And I remember my grandma would say, "You don't throw those seeds in the garbage. Let's make a treat out of them." You know, our treat was sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, all these different seeds, and we would bake them in the oven. Oh, that was what a treat. They taste a lot different than what you have today because they were done with a lot of love. And the other thing that apples, we used to peel apples and we used to string them over the wood stove. Oh gosh, there was a lot of things. Our treats were very nutritious and very beneficial to us. So everybody looked down upon us indigenous people because they said we were poor. But we always knew that we were the richest people because the Creator had given us so much from all these different seeds that came as a gift for us to survive. So these are the stories that we need to hear, the stories of the laughter, of all the good times. You know, sitting around the table is one of the most beneficial gift of all because you're in ceremony. When you're eating, you're in ceremony because you're celebrating that life giver that came to you. And this is why we had in our longhouse, we would have ceremonies, right? The strawberry was at first ceremony. Well, maple syrup, the seed songs, we would sing to them. And there would be a lot of laughters. And then we'd go, and this is what is so important. When you put those seeds in the ground, you sing to them. And I remember one time when I was putting a garden in at my son's, and I asked one of my granddaughters, I said, "You need to sing a song." So she said, "Skiddy-rinky dinky doo, skiddy-rinky doo, I love you." I said, "Oh, that's so good. That plant loves you because you sang that song to you." And she was just a little toddler, and that's what she was singing. In every song that you just sing, it's okay as long as you're singing a song of happiness and joy. That's what makes that crop be that little seed grow into a very delicious seed. It was amazing. I had my great grandchildren sing. They both did go to the immersion school, and what they did was they were singing. I was asking them to sing the song when we planted, And our tomatoes were just so big and plump. And they really enjoyed those tomatoes. They said, Dada, this tastes so different. I said, yes, it does, because you sang to them. You give their love to them. You would come out here and you would say, how are you? Look at, and you would visit them. So you see, they're just like your best friend. And we need to start thinking of them as our best friend, because they don't want to see us get sick. It is the man-made products that are making us sick, because they forgot the most important thing, and that is love. The love that the Creator put in all His seeds. And this is why we handle them with so much honor and respect. So I'm going to turn it back to Uncle. It's his turn now.
And as I was saying, I just want to remind me of something that I read in one of the history books, and regarding how our people way back in the day, way long time ago, before we even had houses. Like I listened to the stories, some of the people I know, I called them my brethren and sisterin, people of the longhouse. I call them that because they are technically our brothers, because a lot of the stuff that they grow, or the things that we grow, we got them from them as well in trading.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, our people, my people, the Anishinaabe people, my people, they lived in longhouses. We lived in wigwams. And when the newcomers came, they were kind of in awe of how we lived. We never had carpets, plush carpets. We never had wooden floors. Even, whether it be in the longhouse, whether it be in the wigwam, or even one of the further people up north in their huts that they had up in the high Arctic. And they believed that we were just eating off the earth. I mean, off the dirt, because to them the dirt was dirty. To us, the dirt was alive.
Mm-hmm.
It was our mother, the top of our mother. And when I think about a lot of that stuff, and I think about, yes, we lived a perfect life. We were healthy. Our ancestors were healthy. Everything they gathered, like for the Anishinaabe people, they were hunters and gatherers. My friends, my brethren and sister, and people of the longhouse, they grew their food. We had to find ours. We ran after it. That's why I run so fast. It takes me 10 hours to run a mile. No. But you know, when I listen to the elder Tom Porter,
Yes.
and I really can relate to him, because you know, I think he's much older than I am. I tease him sometimes. I'd say he's about 200 years older than me. But you know, one of the things that I learned from him was about the planting and the way our people used to live. Then I hear of Peter Uchis
Yes.
and the things that he used to do when he was young, growing up, and all the things that they used to eat, his ancestors. Like I said, we just lived off the ground. What we ate was in birch bark bowls or elm bark bowls or whatever to keep the food, you know. And that's how they used to eat. And they used to eat out of the same bowl. Why not? Because back in those days, before the coming of the people from the European countries, our people were healthy. They were the most healthiest people around. Like when I remember hear the stories of the potatoes being sent to Ireland because they were starving, because of what was happening to them as well. It was our people that, our ancestors that did that. It was our ancestors that did that, whether it be people of the Longhouse or whether it be people of the Wigwam. We were the ones that put all those things here. We were the ones that guided these plants to grow to be what they were, what they still are. And when I think about that, I think about how sometimes I get angry when I think about what they used to say to us when we used to eat off the ground. We weren't eating off the ground. We were just sitting on Mother Earth, eating in bark bowls that were made by our ancestors. And the water. Water is the most precious gift of all. Water was really looked after. Really looked after. Back in those days when I used to hear stories when I was growing up of how a long time ago they used to always go to the water at certain times of the year, especially in spring, summer, and fall. And how they used to go down to the water and get in the water and just sit there because it was their life, it was our lifeblood that they were sitting in, Mother Earth's lifeblood. There's so many things I remember now that I try to remember as many things as I can that I've heard over the years that I've walked this earth. Then all of a sudden this bad stuff came. Our people call it firewater, the demon in the bottle. And things changed for us. It changed drastically. I remember a lot of things growing up, but I try and keep those bad things out of my mind. I only remember the good things. I want to try and remember the good things about the planting seasons, about the strawberries that my aunt gave us when we went to watch her, making sure those plants were good. And the beans that used to be delivered to the house sometimes, or the potatoes that came, or even the corn. Oh, I love corn. I love corn. But I got to be careful now because I got my teeth pulled. But you know what? Doesn't matter. I still love corn. I love potatoes. I love everything about those vegetables that are out there because they were part of who we were. And that's how our ancestors used to eat, is all that, what was there, what was available. But now that the earth is changing, a lot of these nutritional foods that we used to have back in the day growing up are now beginning to be, like Grandmother Renee says, are being used, pesticides are being used on them. Like the chicken. They must fill it full of air, puncture it, it'll blow up. Poof. Same, it's like that with all the meats that we eat. Mm-hmm. There are things added to that, all those things that are, I forget what they call, but they put things into the animal and then to their food, so they make them bigger. When we think about all those animals that were almost extinct, that they were almost killed off, like the buffalo, the people of the prairies, they hunted the buffalo. They gathered the foods that they needed from the ground, and they gathered the nuts, the whatever was edible back then, because how they know it was edible, because the animals ate it. It was those animals that taught us about those foods. When we watch a bird eating some berries, oh, that bird's all right. It just flies away. So we go and eat the berries. But they also say that the pine cone is pretty good because there's things in it too. I'm not too familiar with that part, but I heard somebody talk about the pine cones. But when we look at the wild foods of the land, and when I think about that, how many of those plants are really gone now for our people, the natural food.
Mm-hmm.
In the fall we have beech trees around here. Oh, I love eating those beech nuts. Oh man, they're good. But it takes you a while to pick them because they fall to the ground. That little part opens up in the shell, and the nut falls out of them. And you see the chipmunks taking after them. I wrestled with a couple of the chipmunks for those beech nuts. Body slam each other on the ground. And then the acorns. And then they're called the walnuts. We used to have them here too. And then there's what we call the ground berries. I don't see them anymore here. Then, of course, we have the wild strawberries that grow. And sometimes you hit a patch of wild strawberries. Well, they're not strawberries, but they're just red berries growing. There's no straw around them. They grow naturally here. But sometimes you hit a patch of those things, and they're big. They're only about that size. They're not very big, but yet they're probably the most nutritional things that we could ever see on there. Then we have the blackberries. Then we have the raspberries. Then we have the blueberries. Every berry you could think of was growing wild here. Mm-hmm. And that's what made it good for our people. That's why they were so healthy. That's why they were lean, like lean cuisine. I told my friend the other day, that today when I went to visit her, I had to do a visit today. And I said, I'm a shapeshifter. Look at my stomach. It changed shape. Oh, that's because of the stuff I'm eating, right? That's because of the stuff I'm eating. Oh my goodness. Oh, you, she said, only you can come up with stuff like that. But it's the stuff that we eat. Like grandmother Renee says, if we eat the proper foods, our bodies will, I want to be at least 110 and look like Hulk Hogan or the mighty Thor. But my stomach, but I got to start doing the things that's natural to us. And that natural is the natural foods that we should be eating. Even though the earth is having problems with all these pesticides, all these things that are put into the air and the water, what they're doing with the water is destroying the natural beauty of it. Mm-hmm. And so if we go back to that and start doing, but nobody wants to pay attention to us First Nations people in North America because we already know about what's going to happen. There are those prophecies about what's happening. What they used to talk about way back a long time ago are now starting to happen. They are now starting to happen. But if we look at the foods for our own benefit, the gardens, we need to get back to those gardens. We need to share what we plant so that way everybody doesn't starve. Kind of like what happened when the First Nations people sent all those potatoes to Ireland so they wouldn't starve. That's the sharing. That's the beauty of bringing our world to theirs and knowing that we can do these things still. I believe there's a monument in Ireland. I don't know where. Is it in Dublin? Telling that story? Somewhere over there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think so, somewhere. I saw what you call documentary on it, a brief documentary on it. And I thought, oh my goodness, that made me so happy when I seen that. to honor the First Nations people that helped in that famine. They put something there for us.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about that, how ingenious were we? How was it that we knew, our ancestors knew what to do? I remember even my growing up, again, I remember telling the story earlier too about what my mom and dad used to do. They used to gather things getting ready for winter,
Mm-hmm.
especially food, especially when we lived on an island here, because we were locked in. Once those winter winds came, the fall winds came, you couldn't cross. It was too rough. So you had to have food to last you, at least something to last you till the winds died down, so you could rush across on the boat and go get your stuff and come right back again. But today, when you go to town, some people leave. Some people go to town for 9:30 boat. They're gone all day. They're gone all day. Why? What is it they need all day over there? What is it they need? Me, I go to town. I go get what I'm looking for. If I leave on the 11 o'clock boat, I'm usually back by the 3 o'clock boat. If I'm going to get my supplies for the winter, I make darn sure I have everything in its place when I'm here, because I learned that growing up. I learned that from my grandparents, because they put things in areas. What do they call those things you dig in a hole? Root cellars.
Root cellars.
Root cellars. Yeah. And that's where they put most of their stuff, all their preserves that they made for the fall, everything. That's where everything went. My grandfather and his brother shared a root cellar. I remember that. And because it was dug in a hole, and I remember that door still. Because after they stopped using, after my grandfather's brother passed away, there was no more. As kids, we used to play there, but we were told never to go in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need. That's what we need to look at now. Even though we got fridges to look after our slow-moving cows, our slow-moving pork, So I think that if we started using the fastest animals in the world, like the moose, the deer,
Uh-huh.
the geese, the ducks, the rabbits, even those swimmers sometimes, muskrat, beaver, and we start using that type of food, we could still grow those plants that we need. Like if you want to cook a muskrat, all you got to do is get some potatoes, get some carrots, if you like turnip, and some onion, throw it in there and let it cook all day.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out of there. Oh man, I remember having muskrat. At a family up at Moose Deer Point once. They didn't tell me what it was, but man, was it ever good. Potatoes, right inside in the pan, and the potatoes, the carrots, and whatever else they had in there. Oh God, that was so delicious. They didn't tell me that till after I ate. And you know what that kind of meat was? Nope. It was muskrat. Muskrat. They laughed, when I but you know what? I said how that was a beautiful meal. Miigwech. That was a beautiful meal I had there. That was the first time I ever ate muskrat. And how beautiful that meat tasted. Then I became one of the best swimmers around after eating muskrat. But it was a good family, because that's how they lived. They lived off the land, this family from Moose Deer. They lived off the land. The muskrat, the beaver, the ducks, the geese, they even fishing. Because where they lived, it was hard, because where before the road was made, they had to walk out. And there were 15 miles to walk to a town to get groceries. So they learned to live off the land. And he used to tell me how they used to just go hunting, and they didn't have to go very far. And they'd get a deer. They do the ceremony, I think he said also, because that's what they used to do, right? Before you hunted, you had to do that ceremony the night before, so people wouldn't get hurt. And then when you see the animal, you raise your hand and put your tobacco down. Same thing with doing the garden. People pray, like Grandmother Renee said, people pray before they start to plant. That's to have a good harvest. That's our connection with Creator. That's our connection with all of the land. Everything. That's what made it really great when I hear those stories. Now a lot of our storytellers are going.
Mm-hmm.
They're done. They're getting ready to move on to that spirit world. And who's going to carry those stories on? Who's going to teach the young ones about these gardens and how important they are to our people? Well, we got Grandmother Renee. We got Tom Porter. We got people from up north that can still talk about all that. So, again, like I said, I never grew up with the culture. But I hear the stories of what they used to do. I used to hear the stories. I remember when I was a kid, too, we used to go, my parents had to go work in a place just south of here, Oakville, Ontario. That's it, Oakville, Ontario. And they used to go there to pick strawberries, raspberries, peaches, all this other stuff they had. And that's how they got their money to work, to get ready for winter.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom would always get a basket of cherries.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked if they could take a basket of cherries every once in a while, and then she started making stuff out of that. And when the strawberry season came in, she'd take baskets and make stuff out of that as well. And it was I used to like her pickles. Oh man, the governor sauce. We called it governor sauce, green tomato sauce.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, she'd put that. My dad would get the stove going, and it'd be green tomatoes would come out. They'd go get some, even if they had to go to the mainland to get them. They'd bring them home. I don't know how many jars that one night she made. And when she was said, "Okay, we'll have one jar," and she'd make homemade bread with that. Oh man, that was one of the best meals I've ever had. Just bread and that tomato sauce, green tomato governor sauce or green tomato sauce, whatever you want to call it. They knew how to do those things because they were raised that way. And then, of course, she made this corn relish, I believe. Yes. Corn relish, yeah. Same thing. They'd put it away. Blackberries, raspberries, they'd make strawberries, and they put them away in jars and put them in the basement or underneath in the cellar of our old house. And that's where they would stay. Oh, let's have some strawberries. Okay, go downstairs and get one. Go downstairs and get one. But that was one of the best things of all times, is because a lot of that stuff that they had, used. People would go out to town and buy all these vegetables, and they would make the food that would go through the winter time. I remember being told one time that they never used to eat that that store-bought bread.
Yeah.
They never used to eat that store-bought bread, because there was too many things in it. So that's why they probably made that scone, even though the flour had stuff in it. But you know what? Like Grandmother Renee said, we're still here. They knew how to do it. They know how to put those things together, whether you had a garden or somebody brought you something to make, or all this. I remember when we in the fall, in October, we used to have what they called Achievement Day. This is when all the gardens were going on. And that was one of the best days of all, was that Achievement Day celebrations here on the island. And people would put out their what they grew on tables. They'd make meals and get ready for this big meal at the end of the day. We used to have races. We used to race against each other. 100-yard dash, 1 mile run. But back then, we were a little bit healthier than what we are now.
Yeah.
Oh man, it was beautiful. They'd bring out their, and then that one time what we call Little Christmas. All the preserves that they made in the fall would be, some of it would be brought there, and they'd be placed in bowls on the table, like the green governor's sauce, tomato, and then whatever else they made. It would be all on the table, and we'd be eating. Oh man! But my favorite food, though, was the potato, like Grandmother Renee says. I used to make potato sandwiches when we used to work here. Well, when we worked on the island here, we used to make charcoal. And I used to live by myself, and I'd cook potatoes, and I'd have some left over. So what I would do is I'd make potato sandwiches for lunch, for going to work, right? Throw some onion on there, a little bit of salt and pepper, some mustard, slap it shut, roll it up, put it in my bag for the next morning. Off to work I go. What do you got for lunch, Neil? I got potato sandwiches. Hey, I'll trade you. Okay. And when but potato sandwich was a nice, or like Grandmother Renee said, sometimes you'd eat that potato raw. Oh man, there's a taste of that potato. Before it was boiled, that potato may be a little hard, but you had to chew it in order to enjoy it, because all the nutrients were in that potato was going through your system. Same with the carrots. I remember when my mom grew carrots. They're not very big. They're probably, where am I going? This way. They're probably only about that size. Not very big. But used to pick them, cut the ends off, and eat them. Never mind peeling them. All you had to do is use your hands and wipe it off. Wipe off the dirt and eat it. Oh, I remember that. Those were the days.
Yeah.
Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end. We'd live and laugh. Oops, sorry. I'm getting into the Archie Bunker stuff. But again, like I said, gardening for our people was one of the best exercises they could ever come across.
Yeah.
They'd be happy, they'd be laughing, they'd be doing all this. You'd see them all of a sudden burst out. When we were kids, you used to watch them. When we were getting ready we'd sit there, they'd all of a sudden burst out laughing, their heads would go back. Kind of like that comedian that says how people, native women laugh. Oh, like that.
Don
Bernstick, that's the guy. And when I think about that, I think about some of when they were doing the gardens when I was growing up, when I was a little guy. I remember that. They hear them talking. They talk about whatever it is, but they keep on going.
Yeah.
Along that garden till everything was done. And they come back down the other end, do the same thing. Laugh, talk, break for lunch. And that's how beautiful it was, right? That's how beautiful that was. That planting season was one of the most, I don't know, I can't explain it. Yeah. There's no words to explain planting season. And if there was, wow, we'd be talking here for another 6-7 hours just on those words itself, because the beauty of it, the beauty of putting your hands on the earth, the beauty of touching those seeds, the beauty of harvesting, pulling them out gently, getting them ready for consumption. That's one of the things that, when I think about stuff like that, that's what I think about sometimes is that growing up as a kid watching them plant gardens.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to your turn to look after the garden, water the plants, because my mom had to, after my dad passed away, my mom did a garden by herself. But, we'd help her a little bit. But she'd always say she had to go to work on the mainland. She'd be gone for a week. She'd always say, look after the garden, water it. So I would. I watered her garden for her. And then after a while, she got tired of doing that, and that was it. We had no more garden. That's the sad part.
Yeah.
Because once, I hate, I don't want to. When two people are working together to put a garden together, it's kind of like this. Oops, this way. Kind of like that. But when one of them is gone, it only leaves one. All of a sudden, the interest in the garden by yourself is not the same when you have your partner with you.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing changes. The whole thing changes. And then we had no more garden after that. There are a few people that still made small gardens. You wonder about it. I remember when my wife and I, after we got married, we lived on the mainland for a couple of years, but then we moved here. And she says, "Hun, let's plant a garden." I said, "Okay." So we got a spot in the backyard, and our stuff was growing really nice. Kind of reminded me of those potatoes that my mom and dad used to grow, only about that size. Not very big, but it was a meal. So we planted those, and then we planted some butter beans, a little bit of butter beans, yellow beans. And then, of course, we planted tomatoes.
Mm.
And they look so beautiful out there once they were grown. "Hun," she said, "well, get me a couple of tomatoes from the garden." Okay, well, off I'd go to the garden. I'd go pick them. They look good on one side. Those darn chipmunks were eating on the other side. Oh, man. I said, "Hun, look at this." She looked at them. I brought in 3 tomatoes. Look what those chipmunks done. So what she did, so she cut that tomato in half. And she said, "Is there any more?" I said, "Yeah, there's some more there. Go check them out." Okay, so we did. So I did. So I went and got 3 or 4 more. And there was 2, actually not all of them were eaten, but she cut the end, about part off the chipmunks would eat, right? And then we'd still eat those tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we threw them away, we'd be wasting it. But we still ate them. Not the ones the chipmunks ate. Oh, we laughed. Oh, I couldn't believe how funny that was. Our first garden, we got raided by chipmunks. I thought it'd be the humans. I guess because we did such a good job in planting that garden that the animals decided to help themselves. But we didn't plant again after that because it was hard work because I was busy doing what I had to do. My wife was busy doing her job, and to keep it going was difficult. But I think about that and I wondered, why didn't we continue on with it? Is it because of the chipmunks? No, it wasn't. It was because the environment of our people is changing quickly. We are getting into modern technology. That's what changed everything. But I'll never forget the chipmunks eating my tomatoes. They didn't touch the yellow beans. They didn't touch the potatoes. They didn't touch the other ones, that other piece that we grew. But it was very, very. We had fun with it. That's basically what it was. We had fun with it, and I could still. We were still kind of laughing at that later on in life about those tomatoes. All the one side was beautiful, the other side were all chewed up. But I'm glad those chipmunks had a good meal, because once we took down the garden after everything was done, we were happy with what we had. We were satisfied that we got something out of a garden that my wife and I put together. And that's what I talk about, that togetherness like this. And that's what those seeds and those plants are. They're holding on to Mother Earth like this. That's how it looks like. You look at the trees are doing the same thing. They're holding on to each other and making each other grow and making that happiness for everybody, right? But I wish I could go back to that time again. I really wish, because sometimes I don't like where I am sometimes, because things are starting to happen. People aren't listening. And, I don't know. Again, I'm hoping that maybe something will happen where people will start to listen. But think about those gardens. Think about those beans, and think about those potatoes, onion, celery, carrots, cabbage, turnip, everything you can think of. Think about those farmers as they're preparing now to plant, of what they have to go through. Think about our people, what they had to go through to plant. It's the same thing. Like the people of the Longhouse, what they went through to grow things. And what our people did, the Anishinaabe people, when they had to hunt and gather. Think about them. Think about everyone back in the past, maybe 1,000 years ago, that hunted and gathered their food. Because everything was perfect. Everything that they ate, it made them like strong. And that's why we're still here today, because some of our ancestors planted and taught people to plant. It's not hard to know to plant, but it's hard to plant. If you know what I mean by that, because you're distracted by certain things, right? Like these modern technological devices today. We can learn planting from these modern technological devices, but that modern technological device is not going to go outside and plant these things for you. You have to do that on your own. You have to know what you're doing, how to take care of that earth, when to say the prayers, offer the water, put the plant seeds in the ground, put the plants in the ground, and then you see it blooming. Right? I'll turn it. That's it now. But remember, don't tell anybody about my tomatoes. But I really wish, though, that our people could get back to some of these things. I really wish that, because time. I hate to say it this way. Time is of the essence. We need to get back that healthiness of our people. Even though everything is growing around us and we're losing time, we're losing track of everything. Anyway, that's all I have right now. I say miigwech and nyawa.
I think that chipmunk visited my grandma.
Same thing.
Yeah, my grandma would say, she'd give me a slingshot. Well, she taught me how to make one, and she says, now you got to make sure every time he comes around, you have to. She couldn't say chipmunk. She would say, you got to get that chittamunk. You got to get that chittamunk. He takes in our food. Oh, I would be laughing, and Grandma would, "What you're laughing? He's stealing our food." I would have to refrain from laughing, but it was that laughter that we needed in those times, hard times. And we talked about the walnuts and hickory nuts, and I mean, we here on Six Nation, we had all our families used to go out in the fall time and gather hickory nuts walnuts. I remember I got walnut trees here, I got hickory nut trees, and I gathered my walnuts, and they're hard to break. They're hard to break, so I left them on the driveway so I could drive over them and let them dry out. And then I did that, and all the shells came off, and next thing you know, I come back and hear all the squirrels grabbed all my walnuts, the ones that were cracked. So they left the ones that were hard, so they stashed them. I said, I'm not making this work easy for you. Those were mine. But that's the thing, you take everything and you, with a grain of salt, and you laugh. Because the animals also have to get ready for winter. And that's what I was always reminded. Don't be upset, because the animals have to get ready too, just like you. So these stories are there. They're in our, they're out there. And your grandpa and your grandmas, they have their stories. And one of the stories that really brings to mind is the two-row wampum. The two-row wampum. You see, this belt was to ensure wellness, well-being for all. It didn't just say for the native children, it said for all the children. And so we take that and we think about those. We wanted to make sure the land, so we could think about it as the land, the air, and the water. And that no matter what culture we come from, that we honor and respect it so that everyone would benefit from it. And this is why we had the next one, another one of our bells, and it's called the dish with one spoon. And it's still so important for us because we are here to share. And this is what you would have considered like a Walmart. The dish with one spoon is in Hamilton, the area, Oakville, Burlington, and all that area, and around there, Halton, and this is where we would come. The people from the north would come, and us from the United States. While it wasn't the United States then, it was just across the water. That's how it was referred to, and we would go there and we would trade, because we no matter if we traveled in their territory, we had to have the knowledge of the medicines that was there. We had to have the knowledge of the food that was there, because we would as they say, we like that moose meat. Today our men still, our family still love that moose meat. Our men go up there and hunt, and then we would trade. We would trade some of our food for what they needed, and we traded the corn. So you see, this was an ideal spot. We would come here and we would learn about all the medicines that was around the escarpment. This was a place where we would come and share our language. We would share our teachings and our stories, but most of all, with the indigenous people, was all about sharing the teachings of the land, that everyone was to take care of it, so that all of us would be, as they say, have that peace, power, and righteousness. That relationship with the land was to make sure that our minds would be in a good place. And that's why they tell us our children are eating the animals that they're not motivated. These animals, they don't move. They're not free range. They're not running. So you have to think about what you are feeding your children. If they are in that no motivation, look at what they're, that saying, you are what you eat. And so we must, this is why our people, the indigenous people, would always every year, get a wild game. Because those animals knew how to survive. They knew the foods, and they would put the medicines in their body so that when we ate them, we would be well. One of my friends says, I don't eat meat. I don't eat meat. And she says, are you a vegetarian? I says, oh, yes, I am. I truly am a vegetarian. I eat the animals that are the vegetarians. So I'm taken care of it. So these are things that we looked at the animals. We combine them. And that's one of our teachings, our stories, how that relationship, just like Uncle Neil had talked about that two connection, that relationship, and that is the animals and the plant life. How they came here to help us to be resilient, to be motivated, to be thinking. And this is the foods that we're eating. We have to get back to being motivated, stimulated, because this is what those plants have. Their instruction was to look after us. We have many teachings of why we're to eat these, and we are to have wild meat every year, and it's so important for us. We are to have we choose to live here along the Grand River because it was very much like our homeland. Because we didn't have any borders then, when we still don't, because this was also where we would travel, where we would be. It would be just across the water, just like in your place, wherever you lived, it was across the water. And so this was where we would go and hunt and also provide a, an opportunity of fair exchange. So this was why we still do this, is that land acknowledgement. Well, that now you understand why we say land acknowledgement. It is to give thanks to the one that has created all things for all people. So all of us should be always doing that land acknowledgement, because it has taken care of you and your families for generations and generations and the generations to come. So each one of us has that responsibility to give thanks to the land, to honor the land, and to respect the land. This is what it's all about. Your relationship with Itnistaha Yonhonzari, our mother, the earth. How do you treat your mother? Is it with kindness, or is it with abuse? And this is why we had those treaty belts, was to ensure that there was wellness for all people, not just for the indigenous, but all the people that came that was here on Turtle Island. And so we are here to share these remember when, because a lot of people, as we say, have forgotten the stories, the teachings of the land, where they come from and what has helped them survive. And so when you look at a seed, I always make sure I have some seeds because I tell a story. And those seeds they're waiting for, if I don't plant them, my grandchildren can plant them because I saved them. This is what my grandma taught me. We're to save our seeds. We had a lady in our community I like to acknowledge at this time. Her name was Ione Anderson. We called her the Bean Lady. She was really the inspiration of bringing back the gardening to all of us when it seemed to be falling on the wayside. Because of gardening was part of my life, even when I lived in the city, I had a garden. Would have those big pots, and I would put the basic food in there that we would need. It's like cucumbers or tomatoes or just something that we could have to share. But in the later on, I was able to get uh, a backyard, and my children and I would have a garden there. And our next door neighbor, he come from across the water, but he was also of the land too. And that's what we noticed. There were some people that still remembered their teachings of the land. And so he would share that with my children, and he would exchange. That's what it was all about, exchanging the harvest of what we had worked for. And so you see, this is what this gift, what you call the big change. It is to, as I say, a reality check. How how are you being taken care of? Remember, you have these hands. They were a gift to be doing. And so this is why I know we're having a lot of grief, but the one that can help us with our grieving is she's also that healer, is that you put your hands into that earth and you smell that earth. It is amazing what it can do to your broken spirit, because just the smell of it just brings back that awakening. We need to smell the earth. We need to reconnect to her again. And what better way is, remember when you were a child, when you would go and play in the water and in the mud, how much laughter, how much joy you had. Even though you were all muddy, you still. And I see still some are adults that are playing in mud. What do you call it? They have their vehicles running through the mud. So you see the land with all its gifts, and those are the seeds that has been planted from our creation story. No matter where you come from, we were always reminded those seeds played the very important role of helping us to maintain and to always restore us to wellness. So we need to get back to wellness. We need to get back to deep breathing, to be moving. And we've had a lifestyle that has greatly decreased. We even have little robots washing our floor. And then my grandma would just shake her head because she says they're abusing their most important gift, and that is our body. Our body was, I just heard today that they said about living to be 100, over 100. Isn't that amazing? We have that capacity to do that. It's all in those seeds that we grow and take care of, and how we honor and respect them. So if you want to be pain-free, if you want to learn how to be, as they say, have that good mind, just remember the seed that is taking care of you. What seed has looked after you? To me, it is our natural food that we have been given. And so these seeds play a very important role in everyone's life, your life, my life, in our children's life, in our future's life. And so these, remember when. I hope you always, when you see those seeds, you will remember when we shared our teachings, our experience with those seeds, so that you can continue to flourish how the Creator intended all of us to flourish, with peace, power, and righteousness. And that is honoring and respecting where you come from, and that is the land. And so we say, Oho, Nyawa Miigwech. So is there any questions? Neil will answer them.
Those are awesome. And, and it's so important too that we get back on the land and be able to look after ourselves and plant our food. When we were planting at the garden today, we also sang while we were planting, and we were singing and drumming in the rain as we were planting in the garden. It was beautiful. And, I forgot my gardening gloves, but I just got right in there with my hands and just played with the mud and put the mud over top of those seedlings, and and then just let the mud dry on my hands, and then I was able to clap and take all the mud off my hands just like that without washing it. So, you're right. We're so thrilled to have so thrilled that you're talking about that, about the garden, about how important planting our seeds are, how important the relationship that the gathering place that you would come around Oakville, Halton, for people that would gather and trade, and all those things that you mentioned tonight was just phenomenal. And it really is, the gardening the stuff from the garden doesn't taste the same as the grocery store, and the freshly baked bread, and the fresh jam that's being made from the strawberries and the raspberries that come from the garden. It was a beautiful, beautiful messages, and lots of people were saying that they loved your teachings. They miss you. That it's important that we continue doing this for our children, and so our children can learn. And so it's very, very important time tonight, and it was So timely, wasn't it, Jody?
Yes. I'm just, yeah, I'm in awe. I was just kind of putzing in my kitchen, preparing, some food for tomorrow. And I just really can't wait until I'm so excited for what we're doing in our location in Milton. I'm so excited, Renee, for you to visit it. It's just going to be so fun. And I see, and I'm ready to do it.
Can you hear me?
Mm.
Can you see me? I'm flying. So with that song, it talks about walking with creation, but it also talks about everything that is on the earth. So what we talked about today or tonight it's all related to all those things that we know and all those things that we should know and all those things that we have forgotten. When our elders speak, we listen to what they say, even though we sometimes have to call upon them in that spirit world to tell us exactly what it is that we have to do. And that is that connection that we have with that spirit realm, also with the animal kingdom, also with the plant kingdom. We have that great connection with our mother, the earth. But also we have a connection with our grandfathers and grandmothers. The grandmother that walks across this nighttime sky. And then, of course, our grandfather who walks across this daytime sky. So when we talk to all of them, we are acknowledging the fact that we have a very special gift, and that's the gift of life, that we understand the true meaning of what it is that we have to do. When we light our fires, we think about all those things that came from that fire. When we drink the water, we think about all those things that came from the water. When we touch the earth and put our hands upon Mother, we know and everything that came from that earth. And then, of course, we have the winds, the four directions, the winds from those four directions that breathe upon us as they blow gently across that sky, the earth. Well, that's all I have to say. I just want to say Nyawe, Miigwech. Thank you so much. Remember, I sign autographs at the end of June. June
Nice.
32nd. June
We'll
32nd,
need
I
it.
sign.
We'll be first in line.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. Grandma Renee and Uncle Neil. It's been wonderful to spend the last 2 hours with you and listen to your words of wisdom, and it just warms my heart and my soul, and I'll be able to have a really good sleep tonight, knowing that I'm planting my seeds too. So it's lovely having you guys here.
And acknowledging that beautiful.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good night.